Mike Lee of Utah, who's a member of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Lee, welcome. How are you feeling? Are you doing all okay?
I'm feeling great. I am ready to be back in the saddle and excited for today's hearings to begin.
Are you going to be participating virtually or in person?
I'll be participating in person. I've gotten the sign off from the Office of the Attending Physician. I've gone through the appropriate number of days, and I've been keeping my temperature under control, and I'm no longer contagious.
Well, that is great news. That's like the president is no longer a transmission threat. Now, it's my understanding, Senator Lee, that when you've had the virus, that you have a period of time when you can't catch it again. Is that correct?
That's my understanding as well. Once you've had it, for at least a period of a few months, you're not going to get it again.
So, would you tell our audience, first of all, how's your family? Is everyone else tested negative, or are they feeling good?
Family's doing great. Family's symptom-free. My wife was the only one who was around the same people I had been around when I got it. She got tested. She tested negative. Nobody else has any symptoms.
So, during the period of time that you had it, did you have a fever? Did you feel bad? Were you tired? My friend Robert O'Brien told me it was a little fatiguing, but that was about it.
Yeah, I experienced most of the symptoms. I had fatigue. I had some fevers. Sometimes I felt like it might feel to be 98 years old and in a boxing match.
Ha! Wow. So well, we know that. We know it's a difficult disease, but you're young and in shape. Congratulations. I'm glad to hear that, Senator. So when you go in, what will be the health protocols today? Are senators seating at least 6 feet apart, or are they going to be next to each other? And given that you're not at risk of transmission, can you be closer to other people?
We'll all be seated 6 feet apart, regardless of whether we've had it. And so the seating configuration will look different than it's looked when we've had previous Senate confirmation proceedings involving Supreme Court justices. But it's going to work. We've used this seating configuration for a while now in connection with other hearings in the Senate over the last 6 months. It works. It's a little bit different, but then again, it gives us a little bit more space to stretch out.
Has Chairman Graham given you any indication of Democratic tactics to delay or in any way disrupt the ordinary processing of a Supreme Court nomination?
Well, the interesting thing is, Hugh, one of the techniques that we saw during the last two rounds, that is with Gorsuch first and then with Brett Kavanaugh, we saw some periodic interruptions by members of the audience. It's a lot harder to get into these proceedings than it had been to get into those. In other words, it's a lot more restrictive now to get into these, rather. And so as a result, very, very few members of the public. I mean, basically, you're talking about Judge Barrett and her family, a few representatives from the White House and the Department of Justice. You've got the members of the committee and then one staff member per committee member, and that's about it, and the audience. So it's not as though people were going to be able to get away with the anonymity that is required to stand up and shout horrible things in order to disrupt the proceedings. That one, I think, is something that we worry less about. Some have speculated, I don't know whether this might happen, that at some point they might try to deny us a quorum to do business in the committee. I don't think they'll do that because I don't think that's really in their interest at the end of the day, but we'll see.
What if they do? Is there a means of proceeding if there is no Democratic member in the room?
We will cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't want to show my cards as far as what I think we should do in that circumstance if they do that. But let's just say there are plenty of things we can do if they decide to deploy underhanded tactics.
Now, Senator Lee, I'm a subject matter expert, as they would say, on Article 6. I wrote an entire book about Article 6 because when your seatmate, Mitt Romney, ran for president the first time, I was offended by the anti-LDS rhetoric and went out and researched it and got everyone on the record and wrote a best-selling book called A Mormon in the White House, ? And so I am very sensitive to violations of Article 6. I believe when Judge Barrett went through the confirmation hearings the last time, at least two violations occurred when Senator Feinstein remarked that the dogma lives deeply within her, and when Senator Durbin, himself a Catholic, asked her if she was an Orthodox Catholic. I believe both of those violate Article 6. What's your understanding of Article 6, and do you expect it to be respected today?
First of all, Hugh, bless you for writing that book. I have a soft spot in my heart for anyone who writes a book about the Constitution, especially about relatively obscure, lesser known, little understood provisions of the Constitution. The fact that you wrote one about Article 6 is awesome. I completely agree with you. At least the spirit, if not also the letter, of Article 6 were violated in Judge Barrett's initial confirmation hearings back in 2017 in connection with her appointment to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. I was in the room when those questions were asked. My jaw about hit the floor. And honestly, when the dogma lives loudly within you question was asked by Senator Feinstein, for a second I thought I must have misunderstood that. Surely that doesn't mean what I think she just said, and yet it appears to have been. It's wildly unacceptable to go after somebody on the basis of their religious belief and suggest that they are unfit for office. Just as one or two of my colleagues suggested Russ Vought was unfit for office a few years ago because of his devout Christian beliefs. We can't accept that in our society. And in addition to Article 6, it also violates the spirit, if not also the letter, of two provisions of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause.
Now, Senator Lee, you're very familiar with anti-LDS bigotry extending back to the Missouri Extermination Order. People don't need to go through all the history, but I have been reminding people online that anti-Catholicism is only a couple of hundred years old in the United States, but the Know Nothing Party birthed it. It was in the Republican Party for a long time. It's now nested in the far left side of the Democratic Party. What should your colleagues on the other side be saying to those people who want to bring religion into this debate?
They should remind them that there is a dark period of American history within the last century in which the Ku Klux Klan took root deeply within the Democratic Party in certain parts of this country, in which anti-Catholicism left a stain, an indelible mark, in which multiple United States senators were elected as Democrats through the Ku Klux Klan on an anti-Catholic and racist campaign agenda. Well, one of those senators, Hugo Black, from Alabama, eventually came to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. He left his mark of anti-Catholicism. He forever changed the way we look at the Establishment Clause. And we have Hugo Black and his anti-Catholic rhetoric to blame for the fact that we now have to litigate all sorts of things involving what should be easy to resolve cases regarding the display of something like a nativity scene or a creche or a Santa Claus or a Frosty the Snowman at a city hall around America. All of this was done in the name of anti-Catholicism. It's shameful, and we can't tolerate it in this country. Certainly the Democratic Party of today should not be tolerating it.
So let me turn to another very tricky subject. The Democratic Party will not answer the question about court packing. Your colleague Ben Sasse called it a suicide bomb on two branches of government, both the Senate and the Supreme Court. It is now an Orwellian attempt is underway to redefine it as something other than what we know it to be, which is to add seats to the Supreme Court. A, are you shocked by this? And B, are Democrats going to get away? Jake Tapper would not let the deputy campaign manager of Joe Biden get away with it yesterday, but are they going to get away with hiding on this issue?
They can't get away with it in perpetuity. At some point, they're going to have to acknowledge whether or not they're going to do it, or people will assume, understandably, correctly, that the answer is yes, that they will do it. Now, look, the last time this was seriously attempted was in the fall of 1936, when Franklin D. Roosevelt trotted it out. Even then, when he had a pretty solid supermajority in both houses of Congress, there was enough reluctance that it didn't make headway then. But it did leave a mark. It did end up having some really nasty ramifications for the country, even though the number of justices was left at 9. I attribute, at least in part, a change within the composition of the court with how certain justices voted to that threat and the fact that they got freaked out. Justice Owen Roberts had previously been known as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, standing up to many of the unconstitutional accretions of authority that FDR was trying to bring into the federal government. Justice Owen Roberts flipped his vote in a case called NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin Steel Company, decided just a few months after FDR's failed court packing attempt. That case was decided on April 12, 1937, and he basically redefined the Commerce Clause in a way that rewrote the Constitution, perhaps among the most significant amendments to the Constitution ever undertaken in our nearly 2.5-century existence as a republic, and yet it did so without going through the constitutional amendment process. It's widely believed that Owen Roberts may have switched that vote and thus created that precedent and that de facto constitutional amendment in response to and in fear of additional court packing plans. These things are not to be taken lightly, and we need to nip this in the bud. And we need to make clear that that's not an acceptable thing to do. Sure, the Constitution doesn't prohibit it, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
That is known, and I teach every year, as the switch in time that saved the nine. And it is unfortunate that it happened, but it was rejected by the Senate by a vote of 70-20 in an era where FDR controlled 73 votes. I mean, it's such a radical thing. My last question, Senator. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was a sitting justice, commented on court packing, and she denounced the idea to Nina Totenberg. I do not think it's appropriate for Judge Barrett to answer a question about that, since it would involve her in a political dispute that is reserved to the Senate. But do you have an opinion on whether it's appropriate for Judge Barrett to answer that? And we have 90 seconds.
I'd probably advise her against answering it for the reason that you've stated. She is being nominated. She's currently an Article III lifetime confirmed judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. She's being considered for a lifetime position on the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is a decision that would be made by the two political branches, the executive and the legislative. So if I were advising her, or if I were her, I would insist that that would be a matter better discussed within the two political branches. That really is not something within her control.
I agree with you. We will see. I will be watching with great interest. I'm glad you have recovered, Senator Lee. I'm glad you'll be in the room today to assist Chairman Graham if any Article 6 violations rear their ugly head. Thank you.